Welcome to my monthly series of talks. This one is being given from Perth, Australia, so I have an extra layer on this month. Around 1987, while I was interviewing Ramana Swami about his life, he mentioned that Bhagavan had once given him a list of 6 books to read. The titles were the ones I've listed on the screen. They are Kaivalya Navanitam, Ribhu Gita, Ashtavakra Gita, Elamondre, Yoga Vashishta, and Swarupasaram. That's Ramana Swami with Bhagavan, taken around 1930, and next to it is a photo of me and Ramana Swami, taken in his Samadhi building, I think in 1994. Most of these titles will be familiar to people who have immersed themselves in the Ramana literature. Sorupasaram, the work I will be speaking a lot about today, contains the teachings of Sorupananda, a 16th or possibly 17th century Tamil teacher, who was cited with approval by Bhagavan as an example of a guru who successfully taught his disciples in and through silence. This is going to be the theme of my talk today. I'm going to summarize the entertaining but somewhat hagiographical story of Sorupananda and his chief disciple Tattuvaraya, and then use that as a springboard to talk about Guru's teaching through silence, which was Bhagavan's own preferred method, and the one that he said was the most direct and effective. Let's start with some geography, some geographical background. Sorupananda was a Tamil saint and guru who came from Viramanagar. He lived with Tattuvaraya, the son of his sister. There is a Viramanagar near Tiruchirappalli, Trichy, located at the bottom of this map, which is likely to be the one referred to in the story. I have put Tiruvannamalai, Pondicherry, and Chidambaram in big letters on the map to give reference points. All the events in this remarkable story take place in the vicinity of the Kaveri River between Viramanagar and the coast, and it ends with a story on the coast itself. Sorupananda and Tattuvaraya were pandits. The two of them had studied the sastras and both were fluent in Sanskrit and Tamil. However, it became clear to them that their book knowledge would not grant them liberation, and along with it, the freedom from rebirth which they both desired. They knew that only the direct experience of jnana would give them that. For this to happen, they knew they needed a realized guru. In one of the traditional accounts of their lives, it is stated that both Sorupananda and Tattuvaraya had done tapas together in their previous lives without realizing the self. It was said that the momentum of this past activity manifested as a desire to perform self-inquiry and to find a living guru who could reveal the self to them. They traveled north together initially, but their attempts to find a realized teacher were unsuccessful. It then occurred to them that if they split up, they could cover more ground independently and increase their chances of finding a teacher. Each promised the other that if either of them found a guru and realized the self, he would seek out the other and become a guru to him. Sorupananda headed south while Tattuvaraya headed further north. When Sorupananda reached the outskirts of a town called Govatam, located on the banks of the Kaveri River, he was overcome by bliss. Google Maps has no record of a town of this name on the river. It's probably an old name that no longer exists. However, I have marked the Kaveri River for you to indicate the general area. Sorupananda's hands spontaneously did a pranam and he found himself crying tears of joy and happiness. He thought to himself, there must be a jnana guru staying in this place. Sorupananda did a circuit of the whole town as a gesture of respect before entering the main street to make inquiries about the powerful guru he felt must be residing there. He was told about a reclusive sadhu, Sivaprakasa Swami, who lived near the river in a grove of bushes and rarely ventured out. Sivaprakasa Swami, they said, had constructed a small hut out of river rushes and went out of his way to avoid contact with people. Here's a very nice online photo I found of the Kaveri River flowing close to Trichy and Viramanagar. It even has a little hut on its banks that illustrates the story I'm narrating. Sorupananda assumed that this must be the teacher whose power he had felt as he approached the town. He found the hut, but waited some distance away from it because he didn't want to intrude on the teacher's privacy. Eventually, the sadhu came out. Sorupananda prostrated to him and put his hands on his feet. As he was holding onto them, he made the following request: "Save me from the ocean of birth and death by giving me jnana upadesha," which is initiation into jnana. Sivaprakasa Swami knew at once that a very mature devotee was seeking his help. In his response, he even indicated that he had been waiting for him to arrive. Addressing Sorupananda, he said, "I've been staying in this place for a long time, waiting for you to come to me." Sivaprakasa Swami then gave the jnana upadesha that had been requested, and shortly afterwards, Sorupananda fell into a deep samadhi. Instant results for him. What was this jnana upadesha, this teaching on jnana? There is a possibility that Sivaprakasa Swami asked him to do self-inquiry, following exactly the same method that Bhagavan taught several centuries later. The evidence for this comes from Sorupasaram, the text by Sorupananda that Bhagavan put on Annamalai Swami's reading list. It was written after his realization. In verses 3 and 4, which I will place on this and the following slide, Sorupananda talks about his experience of the self. On the third slide in this sequence, Sorupananda will explain how he was advised to do self-inquiry by his guru, Sivaprakasa Swami. Here are the 3 verses, 1 per slide. Question: is there a logical way of concluding that everything is consciousness alone? Sorupananda: yes, there is. All the world's diversity, which derives from the misperceptions of the mind and which appear to be real, is it not the witnessing consciousness alone? Hence, everything, beginning with liberation and including purity and impurity, happiness and sorrow, that which is and that which is not, is only being. Next verse. Question: if all is being, do objects appear as one's own self, which is being consciousness bliss? Sorupananda: yes, they do. In whichever direction they look, there is absolutely perfect Swarupa, one's own real nature. The real nature of all the holy waters is blissful consciousness. The real nature of all the verses praising the Lord is bliss. Apart from me, what other form can exist? This is the verse that has the instructions on self-inquiry. Question: is the above statement merely verbal or is it experienced? Sorupananda: it is experienced as well. My guru, Sivaprakasa Swami, instructed, "Sir, the world appearance and its substratum, all these are you. There is no one who does not say I. Therefore, inquire thoroughly into the I. If this is known intently and thoroughly, one can say, I myself am perfect consciousness. Hence, I am the primal entity." I don't think there is any other text as old as this which explains Bhagavan's precise method of inquiry as accurately and as concisely as this. And since there is no record of Sorupananda doing any sadhana, he did go into samadhi on his first encounter, I think we have to assume that a combination of self-inquiry and his guru's powerful presence permanently established him in the self soon after the initial meeting. When I cite from text, I will give the reference at the bottom of the slide, but I won't be reading it out. When Sorupananda spoke about the factors that had brought about his realization, he prioritized the power of his guru, Sivaprakasa Swami, rather than any specific sadhana that he had performed. Here he is talking about what happened in a rare personal comment from Sorupasaram. Question: how did this experience of self-realization arise? Sorupananda: it was obtained providentially through the grace of the guru. Like a sweet mango fruit appearing under the thorny Karavelam tree, the divine lotus feet of the Guru, Sivaprakasa Swami, who has the power to bestow the grace to transform me into the reality that is sought by everyone everywhere, came to me who was replete with evil and who was taking births over and over again. Before I continue, I should mention that there are a number of different accounts that diverge at various parts of their story, but the central narrative is common to all of them. This is a version of the early events of this story that Bhagavan passed on in the 1940s. Both Tattuvaraya and Sorupananda decided to go in search of a Sadguru in two different directions. Before they started, they came to an understanding. Whoever finds a Sadguru first should show him to the other. However much Tattuvaraya searched, he could not find a Sadguru. Sorupananda, who was the uncle of Tattuvaraya, was naturally an older man. He went about for some time, got tired, and rested in one place. When Sorupananda is mentioned in Ramana Darsanam books, his name is spelled in the Sanskrit way, Swarupananda, starting with SWA. The spelling I'm using in this talk begins SOR, which is the Tamil equivalent. Bhagavan continues, feeling that he could no longer go about in search, he prayed to the Lord, O Ishwara, I can no longer move about, so you yourself should send me a Sadguru. Having placed the burden on the Lord, he sat down in silence. By God's grace, a Sadguru came there by himself and gave him Tattva Upadesha, instruction for self-realization. In this account, Sorupananda gave up his search for a guru, surrendered to Ishwara, God, and asked him to send the required guru. Ishwara responded by connecting him with Sivaprakasa Swami. The Tattva Upadesha, the instructions for self-realization, was the advice on self-inquiry that I mentioned earlier. I put up a long title and subheading at the beginning of this presentation. It read, Sorupananda, Tattuvaraya, Sri Ramana, and the Power of the Guru's Silent Teachings. Before I continue with my presentation of Sorupananda and Tattuvaraya, I want to tell what I think is a highly relevant parallel story about a devotee who was drawn to Bhagavan in the 1940s and who realized the self through the power of Bhagavan's silent presence combined with an active self-inquiry. Sorupananda realized the self through a short period of self-inquiry and through the powerful presence of his guru, Sivaprakasa Swami. The story I'm about to tell is very similar. On the screen, we have a brief clip of Lakshmana Swami taken in the late 1970s. Above it is a photo of him taken in 1951, 2 years after the experience he's about to describe. This is what he said. The second day of my visit to Bhagavan at Ramana Darsanam in 1949 was Vijayadashami, the final day of the Navaratri festival. In the afternoon, I stood in front of the Matrabhuteshwara temple, waiting for Bhagavan to appear. He came out of his small room, the Nirvana room, accompanied by Swami Satyananda, entered the new hall that was in front of the temple, and took his seat on the stone sofa. There were only a few devotees present at the time. I went up to Bhagavan and made a full prostration in front of him. When I stood up, Bhagavan looked intently at me for a few moments. I withdrew and went to look for a place where I could do self-inquiry and not be disturbed by the other devotees. I selected a pillar that was outside the hall. I selected a pillar that was outside the door that Bhagavan had entered through and sat down in front of it. Though I was outside the hall, Bhagavan could still see me from inside where he was sitting. Let's let this little film clip run to the end since it's such a nice one. Shortly afterwards, I saw Muruganar taking a seat close to Bhagavan. I noticed that other devotees were entering the hall. After a few minutes, Muruganar came and sat down next to me. A few other devotees came and sat near us. I closed my eyes and began to do Who Am I? The quest for the self. Within a few minutes, I found that all thoughts had disappeared except for the primal I thought. The question, Who am I? Then spontaneously appeared within me. As it did so, the gracious, smiling face of Ramana Maharshi appeared within me on the right side of the chest. There was something like a lightning flash that resulted in a flood of divine light, shining both within and without. Bhagavan's face was still smiling on the right side of my chest. It seemed to be lit up with a radiance that exceeded innumerable lightning flashes rolled into one. Again, we'll just wait for this to finish. The bliss and joy of these experiences brought tears to my eyes. A torrential flow welled up within me and rolled down my face. I was unable to control them in any way. Finally, the I thought went back to its source. The internal picture of Ramana Maharshi disappeared, and the self absorbed my whole being. Let this one run a little bit. This photo is Bhagavan sitting on his sofa in the New Hall in late 1949 or early 1950. The events Lakshmana Swami is narrating took place in October 1949. This is how he finished his account. From that moment on, the self shone alone, and the I thought, the individual self, never arose or functioned in me again. It was permanently destroyed through the grace of my Guru in his holy presence. When I, that's me, David Godman, asked Lakshmana Swami if he wanted to elaborate on this brief description in any way, his reply was even more terse. The I went back to its source, the self, and disappeared without trace. The self remained alone. It is eternal peace and bliss. The experience was definitive and complete. He remained permanently in the state of self-abidance, self-realization, and passed away more than 70 years later in Tiruvannamalai in February 2021. He came to Bhagavan at the age of 23 and got the full experience of the self on his second day there after sitting in Bhagavan's presence and asking himself, who am I, just once. I think Bhagavan could see how ready he was that day because he sent Muruganar to look after him as he was sitting just outside the New Hall. It was a good move. After the experience, Lakshmana Swami was physically unable to move for many hours. When the Vijayadashmi procession started later that evening, Muruganar was on hand to make sure that Lakshmana Swami was not disturbed or asked to move by the devotees who were carrying the palanquin that is traditionally paraded at the end of the Vijayadashmi celebrations. I have read out the account from the Power of the Presence rather than the biography No Mind, I Am the Self, since this version contains the extra information that Bhagavan looked at him and evaluated him as a highly evolved devotee who was on the brink of realization. A conjunction of two things is required for speedy realizations of this sort. A powerful guru whose presence alone has the power to devour the self, individual self, and a mature devotee whose individual self has been so attenuated by meditation, tapas, or a hunger for God that the self can reach out and permanently devour it. This conjunction was present when Sorupananda encountered Sivaprakasa Swami, and it was also there when Lakshmana Swami was drawn to Ramana Darsanam and Bhagavan in 1949. I want to mention another devotee, Swami Ramdas, to whom this happened through Bhagavan's powerful presence. I am including it here because Swami Ramdas explicitly stated in one of his accounts that anyone who turns up in front of the Guru in the state that he was in when he encountered Bhagavan would get the same results. Liberation is not a random event or one bestowed by the choice or whim of the Guru. It happens automatically when a pure attenuated I contacts and is destroyed by the power of the self acting through the Guru. And Ramdas added that devotees who were not in that mature state could not have the full and permanent experience bestowed on them irrespective of how much they pleaded for it. Swami Ramdas had an immense hunger to see Ram, and his quest took him all over India until he met Bhagavan in the 1920s. After meeting Bhagavan in the thatched building that had been erected over his mother's samadhi and receiving his blessings by a look of grace, he went up the hill and engaged in devotional practices to Ram for several weeks. He initially had visions of Ram, and then finally a full and permanent experience of the self, which he says never left him. On the top right is the thatched hut in which Bhagavan and Ramdas met in the 1920s. Underneath is a photo of Swami Ramdas taken in that era. And this is what Ramdas said about the experience he had in the cave on the hill. This is the text on the slide. The bliss and joy came to be permanent, like a rushing torrent, like a torrent rushing downhill till it finds a placid level. This experience is called Sahaja Samadhi, in which you can never be cut off from the consciousness of being at one with the one who has become all, in which you feel you are one with all, because you have perceived that all is he, the one without a second. Many years later, in the late 1950s, after telling the story of his realization to some of his own devotees in Kerala, he was asked if he could bestow the same state on them. This is what he said in reply. I have spread it over 2 slides. The remarks on the second slide were recorded in the Vision, the magazine of Swami Ramdas's Kerala ashram. Ramdas went to Ramana Maharshi in a state of complete obliviousness of the world. He felt thrills of ecstasy in his presence. The Maharshi made the awakening permanent in Ramdas. Some people told Ramdas, you went to Maharshi and you got illumination. Give us illumination like that. Ramdas said, you must come to Ramdas in the same spirit and in the same state as he went to Maharshi. Then you will also get it. Where was his heart? How intense was his longing? What was the world to him at that time? If you come in that state, it will be all right. When I was telling the story of Sivaprakasa Swami and Sorupananda, I noted that Sivaprakasa Swami knew that Sorupananda was going to come and see him, and that he was patiently waiting for his arrival. This is something of a cliche in guru-disciple tales, but it does seem to have some foundation. When I interviewed Lakshmana Swami in the early 1980s, he said that he knew that Saradama, a devotee who realized the self in his presence in 1978, was destined to come to him decades before she showed up. He had had visions of her coming even before she was born in the late 1950s. When she did eventually show up, he recognized a long-standing past life connection with her, something else that is common in guru-disciple tales, and he also noted her extreme purity. When I asked him once how he knew she was destined for self-realization, he replied, I searched her mind again and again, but I couldn't find a single bad thought in her. These are photos from that era. The 2 at the top are of Lakshmana Swami taken in the mid-1970s. Below are 3 of Saradama. The 2 on the left were taken at the age of 15, soon after she met Lakshmana Swami. The one on the right is from when she was 18, shortly after her realization in his presence. So to recap, here are the primary components of a guru-disciple relationship that seems to be necessary for a speedy realization. First, a realized guru who, in the right circumstances, has the power to liberate devotees. Next, an extremely pure devotee who is hungering for the truth or God. And third, a possible past life connection that brings the 2 of them together again. Meanwhile, what had happened to Tattuvaraya, Sorupananda's nephew? When he failed in his own attempt to find a realized teacher, he decided to look for his uncle to see if he had had any better luck. There is no record of where the 2 of them eventually met, but when they did, Sorupananda became Tattuvaraya's guru in accordance with the agreement they had made earlier. Tattuvaraya realized the self quickly and effortlessly in the presence of Sorupananda. We can therefore assume that he met the criteria for a quick realization that I outlined in the previous slide. Apart from the readiness, the maturity, and the presence of a powerful guru who had the power to enlighten, the traditional story also states that the two of them knew each other in their previous lives. Tattuvaraya later became a prolific poet who, like Muruganar, ended up composing thousands of Tamil verses about the nature and experience of the self. In the opening lines of Padutturai, one of Tattvaraya's major works, he reveals just how speedily his realization happened through the power of his uncle and guru. It's this verse on the left. The feet of Sorupananda, they are the ones that through grace and assuming a divine form, arose and came into this fertile world to enlighten me in the time it takes for a black gram seed to roll over. But black gram is the dal that is one of the two principal ingredients of idlis and dosa. It is 2 to 3 millimeters across and slightly asymmetrical rather than spherical. I have put a photo of a seed on the slide. As you can imagine, if you tried to stand one up vertically and then let go, it would instantly fall over. That falling over time, says Tattuvaraya, is how long it took him to realize the self. In another of his verses, Tattuvaraya repeated the same image by writing that Sorupananda granted him liberation in the time it took for, quote, a black gram seed to wobble and turn over onto its side, unquote. On the right is a statue of Tattuvaraya that can be found inside his Samadhi shrine. More on that place later. Tattuvaraya attributed this near instantaneous enlightenment wholly to the power and grace of his guru, rather than to personal qualities or readiness. This is what he wrote in some of his verses. It is possible to stop the wind. It is possible to flex stone. But what can be done with our furious mind? How marvelous is our guru, he who granted that this mind should be totally transformed into the self. My tongue, repeat this without ever forgetting. When my Lord, who took me over by bestowing his lotus feet, glances with his look of grace, the darkness in the heart vanishes. All the things become completely clear and transform into Shivam. All the sastras are seen to point towards reality. More of Tattvaraya's verses. Most glorious Lord, if you hadn't looked upon me with your eye of divine grace and illuminated me with the light that shines as the flourishing world, as many as jnana and as one, where would be the mind with which I inquired, and where would I, your devotee, be? To destroy me, you gave me one look in which there was no looking. You uprooted the ignorance of I and mine. You brought to an end all the future births of this cruel one. O Lord, am I fit for the grace that you bestowed on me? Since all these events happened several centuries ago in places that no longer seem to exist on modern-day maps, there is a shortage of relevant pictures to illustrate them. The next few slides containing one long quote from Tattuvaraya on the greatness of his guru are illustrated by photos of Tattvaraya's Samadhi shrine. I think the pictures were taken about 15 years ago when a party of Ramana Darsanam devotees went there on a pilgrimage. Those of you who regularly visit Ramana Darsanam will recognize many of the faces there. Though Tattuvaraya knew that it was the immense power of his guru that had granted him liberation, he was at a loss to understand why that power had ultimately singled him out as a worthy recipient of its liberating grace. In one of his long, continuous verses, parts of which I'm about to read out, he ruminated on the mysterious nature of prarabdha, why events had unfolded the way they did in various narratives of the gods, before chronicling the circumstances of his own liberation in a stirring peroration. This is what he wrote, and it's spread over a few slides. When even the gods despair, when those who investigate the paths of every religion become confused and grow weary, when even they fail to reach the goal, they who perform great and arduous tapas, immersing themselves in water in winter, standing in the midst of fire in summer, and foregoing food, so that they experience the height of suffering. I do not know what it was that bestowed jnana upon me. Was it through the very greatness of the noble-minded one, Sorupananda? or through the nature of his compassion, or was it the effect of his own absolute freedom to choose me? Before I continue, I should say I gave my own answer to this earlier. The Guru doesn't have the power to pick and choose who receives liberation. In the Guru's presence, it happens automatically in those who are pure enough, want it enough, or have done the requisite amount of spiritual work to bring the mind and its desires under control. Tattuvaraya continues. I was the lowest of the low, knowing nothing other than the objects of sense. I was lost, limited to this foul body of 8 hands span, filled with putrid flesh. But he bade me, come, come, granting me his grace by looking upon me with his lotus eyes. When he spoke that single word, placing his noble hands upon my head and crowning it with his immaculate noble feet, my eye of jnana opened. Prior to this, I was without the eye of jnana, suffering through births and deaths for countless ages. The eye of jnana mentioned here is that state in which there is no seeing or knowing of objects by a subject. There is only the objectless knowing of one's own self, a state in which nothing is ever seen or known to be different or apart from one's own self. Bhagavan called this the infinite eye, that's EYE, in verse 4 of Oladunapadu. Tattuvaraya concludes, but when he commanded me, see, then for me there was no fate, there was no karma, there was no fiery-eyed death. All the world of differentiated forms became simply a manifestation of Sorupananda. The final line of the previous slide stated, all the world of differentiated forms became simply a manifestation of Sorupananda. There are other verses which reaffirm Tattvaraya's statement that after he had been liberated by Sorupananda, he knew nothing other than the Swarupa, the unmanifest true nature of one's own self, which had taken the form of Sorupananda to enlighten him. Here they are. All that appears is only the Swarupa of Sorupananda. Where are the firm earth, water, and fire? Where is air? Where is the ether? Where is the mind, which is delusion? Where indeed is the great Maya? Where is I? In greatness, there is no one to equal Sorupananda. Of this, there is no doubt. Similarly, there is no one equal to me in smallness. I did not know the difference between the two of us when, in the past, I took the form of the fleshy body, nor later, when he had transformed me into himself, by placing his honey-like lotus feet on my head. Now I am incapable of knowing anything. He continues, let some say that the Supreme is Shiva. Let some say that the Supreme is Brahma or Vishnu. Let some say that Shakti and Shiva are supreme. Let some say that it is with form. Let some say that it is formless. But we have come to know that all forms are only our Guru. Tattuvaraya wrote of the consequences of his realization in a poem entitled The Lady Telling Her Maid. It's from Paduturai. The second of the 5 verses, which speaks of the simple ascetic life he subsequently led, was mentioned with approval by Bhagavan in talks. The first verse says, our reward was that every word we heard or said was nada, divine sound. Our reward was to have remaining still, summa irutal, as our profession. Our reward was to enter the company of virtuous devotees. My dear companion, this is the life bestowed by our Guru. Our reward was to have the bare ground as our bed. Our reward was to accept alms in the palms of our hands. Our reward was to wear a loincloth as our clothing. My dear companion, for us, there is nothing lacking. I mentioned that Bhagavan once commented on this verse. After reading it, he remarked, I had no cloth spread on the floor in earlier days. I used to sit on the floor and lie on the ground. That is freedom. The sofa is bondage. It is a jail for me. I am not allowed to sit where and how I please. Is it not bondage? One must be free to do as one pleases and should not be served by others. And Bhagavan concluded, no want is the greatest bliss. It can be realized only by experience. Even an emperor is no match for a man with no want. The emperor has got vassals under him, but the other man is not aware of anyone beside the self. Which is better? The poem continues. Our reward was to be reviled by all. Our reward was that fear of this world and of the next died away. Our reward was to be crowned by the lotus feet of the virtuous one, the Guru. My dear companion, this is the life bestowed by our Guru. Our reward was the preeminent wealth, that is, freedom from desire. Our reward was that the disease called desire was torn out by the roots. Our reward was the love in which we melted, crying, Lord, ah, my dear companion, tell me, what tapas did I perform for this? There is an indirect reference in the first line to Tirukkural, where it says there is no preeminent wealth in this world like freedom from desire. Even in the next, there is nothing to compare to it. The final verse of the poem says, our reward was to wear the garment that never wears out. Our reward was to possess as I, the one who is present everywhere. Our reward was to have our false devotion become the true. My dear companion, this is the life bestowed by our benevolent Guru. The garment that never wears out is, I think, Chidakasha, the space of consciousness. If there has been a uniting and unifying theme of this talk so far, it is that there are historical instances of gurus encountering mature devotees and liberating them in a very short period of time. Sivaprakasa Swami liberated Sorupananda shortly after he advised him to do self-inquiry. And Sorupananda, as some of the recently displayed slides indicate, liberated Tattuvarayar through his powerful look and by placing his hands on him. Ramana Maharshi noted that mature devotees were like gunpowder whose karma could be ignited and destroyed by a single spark from the Guru. Here is an answer he gave. Question. It is said that one look of a Mahatma is enough, that idols, pilgrimages, etc. are not so effective. I have been here for 3 months, but I do not know how I have been benefited by the look of the Maharshi. Bhagavan. The look has a purifying effect. Purification cannot be visualized. Just as a piece of coal takes long to be ignited, a piece of charcoal takes a short time, and a mass of gunpowder is instantaneously ignited, so it is with grades of men coming into contact with Mahatmas. I cited 2 modern-day instances of this occurring through Ramana Maharshi's power and presence. Lakshmana Swami on the second day of his visit to Bhagavan in 1949, and Swami Ramdas, who had the experience in a cave on Arunachala a few days after being looked at and blessed by Sri Ramana on his first visit to Ramana Darsanam in the 1920s. Before I return to the story of Tattuvaraya and Sorupananda, I want to put forward an interesting contention upheld by many Saivas that the human guru has a greater power to liberate than God. One implication of this is that for most people, a human guru is necessary. This is what Muruganar recorded Bhagavan saying in Guru Vajka Kovai. Under a title, The Superiority of God over the Guru, Bhagavan said, when the devotee is fully mature, only when the devotee is fully mature, does Lord Parameswara, through his grace, bestow the true jnana in abundance. The Guru, on the other hand, brings the devotee's mind to complete maturity through his power, and then bestows true jnana by charging it with Saktipada. The title of the verse was given by Muruganar, seen here on the right, while the words in the verse are from Bhagavan himself. The implication is that most devotees simply don't have the maturity to receive liberation from God directly, but if they associate with a human guru, that guru will slowly mature them before liberating them once that full maturity has been attained. Bhagavan confirms in the 2 Guru Vajka Kovai verses on this slide that while the guru shines as being consciousness in the hearts of all beings, those beings are generally not mature enough to access it directly unless they associate with the form of an external guru. He said, the guru is the Satbodham, being consciousness that shines, abiding as all in all. But as he says in the next verse, an external guru is needed because the desire-intoxicated, infatuated mind rushes out without listening with love to the truth unceasingly proclaimed in the heart by the self, being consciousness. Muruganar, seen here on the right, added his own explanatory note between these two verses. This is what he wrote. It is because of the immaturity in the seeker that a guru appears outside assuming a form. In truth, the guru is only the inner self. As we do not seek with longing and love the truth of that self which shines unceasingly in the heart, the power of grace manifests a guru outside, who appears as separate from us. I'm going to expand on this idea a little bit with a verse from Padamalai, followed by a long explanatory note I included there. In the verse, Bhagavan declared, "Only the divine grace that wells up in abundance in the form of the Guru can very easily put a stop to the dizzying whirl of the infatuated mind." And this is, meaning the form of the physical Guru is required for most people because they are unable to access the inner Guru, the self, directly. And this is what the commentary says. In the Saiva Siddhanta tradition, there are three impurities: anava, ego, karma, and maya, illusion, that prevent devotees from attaining the ultimate goal, oneness with the consciousness of Shiva. Commentary continues. Those who have all three impurities, malas, need a human guru to realize sadasivam, consciousness of Shiva. Those devotees who are only afflicted by anava and karma can realize sadasiva by having Shiva appear before them in a physical form. Many of the devotees from the Periya Puranam would come into this category. Those in the third category, whose only mala is anava, can get enlightenment through the power of the self within, without needing either a human guru or the darshan of an external god. Bhagavan would be a good example of someone who became enlightened through the power of the self alone. Since devotees who fall into the second and third category are quite rare, the necessity of a human guru is stressed. The explanation continues. The implication of this threefold division is that the human guru is the most powerful vehicle through which grace can operate. Muruganar subscribed to this Saiva philosophical view since he has written the following words on Bhagavan's enlightenment. This is Muruganar. The fact that the inquiry, who am I, spontaneously arose in his, Bhagavan's heart as a result of practice in past lives, and the fact that he attained the ultimate state of perfection very easily merely by that inquiry, from these facts the discerning ones can realize that only a trace of anava, ego or individual I sense, remained as a cause for his final birth. Muruganar is saying here that Bhagavan didn't need a human guru because he only had a tiny trace of anava in his final birth, and none of the other two malas which would have necessitated a human guru to eradicate. And how much anava did he have? Virtually none, according to Muruganar, who once wrote in a brief biography of Bhagavan that Bhagavan's trace of anava was, quote, as thin as the wings of a fly, unquote. Muruganar summarized all this by writing, God reveals the truth to most people by appearing physically, assuming a form which is the embodiment of grace. To a few, he appears by shining within as the self, the pure consciousness that supports the mind. The way he appears will depend on the fitness of the aspirant. I will conclude this explanation and digression on the differing powers of gods and gurus when it comes to liberating devotees by posting one more Padamalai verse from Bhagavan, which says, honor and cherish the jnani who lives in a walking temple more than a god who lives in a big temple surmounted by fluttering flags. Which is to say, show greater respect to a jnani because unless you're a highly evolved and mature devotee, they are far more likely to get you liberated than the gods. That little diversion into the differing powers of gods and gurus to liberate devotees leads me back to Tattuvaraya, who made the same point as Bhagavan and Muruganar. In a somewhat elaborate verse, which I will go through now, he maintained that Sorupananda, his guru, was much more effective at granting liberation than the gods Brahma, Siva, and Vishnu. He began by writing about Brahma. In order to convince the Devas, Brahma, that's him on the right, lacking the power to make them experience directly the state of pure being, held the red-hot iron in his hand and declared, "This is the ultimate reality declared by the Vedas. There is nothing else other than this, I swear to it." This is a reference to an incident in the Bhagavad Gita, which Tattuvaraya himself translated from Sanskrit into Tamil. Brahma, unable to pass on a direct experience of the self to his students because he lacked the power to do so, was forced to swear an oath affirming the truth of his teachings in the hope that his students would believe it and have the experience for themselves. The next comparison with Shiva as Dakshinamurti is numerical. Shiva as Dakshinamurti declared, "In all the worlds only the four are fit. They alone are mature for Tattvajnana." This is a reference to Shiva as Dakshinamurti, bringing the four sages, Sanaka, Sanandana, Sanat Kumara, and Sanat Sujata, to realization through the power of his silence. The implication here is that Shiva could only find four mature enough devotees to enlighten. This is slightly unfair in my opinion, since he had a 100% success rate with the devotees he selected. Also, the comparison between the respective power of gods and the guru is not tested here, since Dakshinamurti is both a god and a guru. And finally, Tattuvaraya pokes fun at Krishna for failing to liberate Arjuna. He said, "Lord Krishna, holding the discus, had to repeat 18 times to ignorant Arjuna, who was seated on the wheeled chariot. But here in this world, my guru, Sorupananda, bestows jnana on all as palpably as the gem in one's palm." The 18 times is a reference to the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna failed to liberate Arjuna during the period that he was passing on the text of the Bhagavad Gita, and Bhagavan himself has commented on this failure, saying, "Likewise, Arjuna, though he told Krishna in the Gita, delusion is destroyed and knowledge is imbibed, confesses later that he has forgotten the Lord's teaching and requests him to repeat it. Sri Krishna's reiteration in reply is the Uttara Gita." That's from Ramana Reminiscences. At the end of the slide that had the Krishna comparison, Tattuvaraya boasted that his own guru, Sorupananda, had more liberating power and was more effective in utilizing it than the gods themselves, because he bestowed, quote, jnana on all, unquote, while the gods could only manage a small number or none at all. There is definitely a level of hyperbole in this, since I doubt very much that everyone who came into contact with Sorupananda realized the self. However, he did have an immense power to stop the minds of the people around him, even people who had very few spiritual qualifications. One famous demonstration of this power was an incident Bhagavan was particularly fond of retelling. Before I narrate it, I want to move the story along by continuing the traditional story of Tattvaraya's life. After his realization, Tattuvaraya subsequently spent much of his time absorbed in the self. Sorupananda knew that his disciple had a great talent for composing Tamil verses and wanted him to utilize it. However, to bring him out of his samadhi and to set him on the literary path, he knew that he had to coax him out of his near perpetual samadhi state. This is how the story unfolds in the traditional version of Tattvaraya's life. I included this in the introduction to our edition of Sorupasaram, which is why I have posted the cover here as I retell the story. This is how it went. Sorupananda thought, "This Tattuvaraya is highly accomplished in composing verses in Tamil. Through him we should get some sastras composed for the benefit of the world." He indicated his will through hints for a long time, but as Tattuvaraya was in nishta, self-absorption all the time, he could not act on the suggestions. Sorupananda eventually decided to accomplish his objective by following a different course of action. Pretending that he wanted to have an oil bath on a new moon day, he turned to his attendant and asked, "Bring oil." Tattuvaraya, who was standing nearby, knew that it was Amavasya, new moon day. He began to speak by saying and then stopped. It is prohibited to have an oil bath on Amavasya. This breach with custom was sufficient to bring Tattuvaraya out of his self-absorption. He spontaneously uttered presumably as a prelude to saying that it was Amavasya, but then he stopped because he immediately realized it would be improper for him to criticize any action his guru chose to perform. This gave Sorupananda the opportunity he was looking for. As soon as he heard Tattuvaraya speak, Sorupananda pretended to be angry with him. He said, "Can there be any prohibitions for me? I, who am abiding beyond time, having transcended all the sankalpas that take the form of do's and don'ts. Do not stand before me. Leave my presence." Tattuvaraya thought to himself, "Because of my misdeed of prescribing a prohibition for my guru who shines as the undivided fullness of being consciousness bliss, it is no longer proper for me to remain in this body. There can be no atonement other than drowning myself in the sea." With these thoughts in his mind, he walked backwards while still facing his guru, shedding torrents of tears at the thought of having to leave his presence. Other versions of this story make it clear that Tattuvaraya walked backwards away from his guru's presence because he felt it was improper to turn his back on his guru. Though it is not clear in this particular retelling, he apparently walked backwards until he reached the shore of the sea, where he intended to drown himself. Through the compassion he felt for other beings and through the power of the self-experience that possessed him, he began to compose verses as he was walking backwards towards the ocean. These were the 18 works he composed in praise of both his guru and his paramaguru, Sivaprakasa Swami. These were noted down by some of Sorupananda's other disciples. As he continued to sing these 18 works, the disciples who were following him took down what he said, conveyed the verses to Sorupananda, and read them in his presence. Sorupananda pretended not to be interested, saying, "Just as a woman with hair combs and ties it, this one with a mouth is composing and sending these verses." Another version of Tattvaraya's life states that Sorupananda had sent disciples to write down the verses that Tattvaraya was composing, so his lack of interest should not be taken to be genuine. It was all part of a ruse to get his disciple to begin his literary career. Meanwhile, the story continues. Tattvaraya was pining and lamenting, "Alas, I have become unfit to have the darshan of my guru. Henceforth, in which birth will I have his darshan?" Like a child prevented from seeing its mother, he was weeping so much his whole face became swollen. At this point, he was singing Tiruvadimalai from Paduturai. He was close to the edge of the sea and was about to die. When the disciples went to Sorupananda and updated him about these events, he relented and said, "Ask the Guru Vukuvingi, the one whose obsessive desire for his guru is making him ill, to come here." When Tattvaraya heard about this, he was completely freed from his bodily suffering, and he also regained the power to walk forwards. A 19th century anthology of the biographies of Tamil poet saints entitled Pulavar Puranam reports in one verse of the Tattuvaraya chapter that he was already neck deep in the sea when Sorupananda summoned him to return. The story continues. He, Tattuvaraya, told the disciples who had arrived with a message, "Sorupananda, the repository of grace and compassion, has ordered even me, a great offender, to return." Experiencing supreme bliss, he sang some more portions of Paduturai and then returned to the presence of the Guru. He stood there shedding tears in ecstasy, singing the praises of his guru. Sorupananda merely said, "Iru." Iru is the imperative of a verb that means both be and stay. In choosing this word, Sorupananda was ordering him both to remain physically with him and also to continue to abide in the state of pure being. The next development of the story revolves around an incident that Ramana Maharshi mentioned or retold on several occasions. Around this time, Tattvaraya composed a long poem in praise of his guru, Sorupananda. It was done in the form of Bharani, which is a meter generally reserved for victorious kings who have won notable military victories. It is a literary form that is specifically reserved for compositions about heroes who have slain 1,000 elephants on a battlefield. I had a look at this Parani many years ago, thinking it might be something that could be translated, but I was put off when I discovered it was over 700 verses long. This is how the story continues in the traditional account. Tattuvaraya composed some Vedanta Sastras, but was mostly in Samadhi. Around that time, some Virasaivas who were on a pilgrimage, along with some Pandits, came before Tattuvaraya, who was sitting in the presence of Sorupananda. They read the Bharani and complained, "A Bharani is only sung about great heroes who have killed 1,000 male elephants on the battlefield. How is it that you have composed this kind of poem on your guru, who has not heard of or known heroic valor even in his dreams?" To this Tattuvaraya replied, "As our guru kills the ego elephants of disciples, I sang in this way." They responded, "The ego elephant that you mentioned is not visible to the eye, so it is not proper to compose in this way." However, even to kill one ego elephant would take many, many days. How did he manage to kill the egos of 1,000 disciples simultaneously? Tattuvaraya, thinking that they should be shown through a demonstration, resumed his samadhi state without replying to them. Under the power and influence of Sorupananda, all the Pandits who came remained in Paripurnam, that means had the full experience of the self, for 3 days without knowing either night or day. On the 4th day, Tattuvaraya opened his eyes. All the Pandits arose and prostrated to both Tattuvaraya and Sorupananda. They said, "It was because of our ignorance that we objected. The power of your Sorupananda's presence is such that even if 10,000 disciples happen to come, it, the presence, has the ability to bring them all to maturity simultaneously." Then they composed their own verses in praise of the Bharani and departed. All the biographical information I've given in the recent sequence of slides has been taken from the Tamil book that is listed in the bottom right. We consulted other sources, but this one gave the longest and the most detailed version of events. What follows is Bhagavan's slightly different version of the same story. As with other incidents from the lives of Sorupananda and Tattuvaraya, the differences can be ascribed to separate and slightly divergent accounts of their lives. Bhagavan said, "Tattuvaraya composed a Bharani in honor of his guru Swarupananda and convened an assembly of learned Pandits to hear the work and assess its value. The Pandits raised the objection that a Bharani was only composed in honor of great heroes capable of killing 1,000 elephants, and that it was not in order to compose such a work in honor of an ascetic." Bhagavan continued, "Thereupon the author said, 'Let us all go to my guru, and we shall have this matter settled there.' They went to the guru, and after all had taken their seats, the author told his guru the purpose of their coming there. The guru sat silent, and all the others also remained in mauna. The whole day passed, night came, and some more days and nights, and yet all sat there silently, no thought at all occurring to any of them, and nobody thinking or asking why they had come there." Bhagavan continued, "After 3 or 4 days like this, the guru moved his mind a bit, and thereupon the assembly regained their thought activity. They then declared, 'Conquering 1,000 elephants is nothing beside this guru's power to conquer the rotting elephants of all our egos put together. So certainly he deserves the Bharani in his honor.' As the slide notes in the bottom right, this account comes from Day by Day with Bhagavan. There is a very similar retelling of the story in Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, talk number 262. It is not unreasonable or fanciful to compare the relationship of Tattuvaraya and Sorupananda with the one that existed between Muruganar and Bhagavan, seen here together in the late 1940s. Let us consider a few of the similarities. Both Sorupananda and Bhagavan quietened and occasionally eliminated the minds of devotees through the power of their silent teachings. Their preferred method of teaching appeared to be the transmission of the essence of the self in silence. The disciples, Tattuvaraya and Muruganar, both came to their respective gurus and realized the self in a fairly short period of time. Afterwards, both of them composed a massive amount of spiritual and philosophical poetry in Tamil. Sorupananda literally means the bliss of remaining in one's own true state. I think Sorupananda preferred silent self-abidance to writing, producing only one short work in his lifetime. Bhagavan's output too was relatively small. His original writings amount to less than 100 pages. Tattuvaraya, whose name can be translated as the king of philosophy, was, like Muruganar, a prolific writer. He produced thousands of verses whose topics included, just like Muruganar, praise of his guru, expressions of gratitude towards him, and many, many verses that verbalized the nature of his own experience of the self. There is one story that for me shows how similar Sorupananda and Bhagavan were in their teaching methods and their love of silence. On the right is Bhagavan standing in front of the thatched building that was constructed over his mother's samadhi. The photo was taken in the second half of 1922 and is the oldest photo we have of Ramana Darsanam. In early 1923, 7 devotees sat in this hut on Sivaratri evening. They had decided that, following tradition, they would stay up all night and keep each other awake by telling spiritual stories and by chanting from scriptural works. This story was told to me by Ramana Swami Pillai, who was standing behind Bhagavan in the left side photo with his arms folded. He was one of the 7 devotees who were present that evening. At around 10 p.m., all the devotees assembled in the hut. To start the proceedings, Bhagavan was invited to speak about Dakshinamurti, Shiva manifesting as the silent guru who brought 4 sages to realization by the power of his silence. The assembled devotees waited for him to begin, but he said nothing at all. Instead, he gave a practical demonstration of how silent teachings worked. Ramana Swami Pillai later reported that all 7 devotees fell into a thought-free silence that lasted all night. When I asked him about this in the 1980s, he said, "None of us that night had a single thought. We were awake, peaceful, and mentally silent. Nobody moved either mentally or physically for about 7 hours. At about 5 a.m. the next morning, Bhagavan stirred slightly and the spell was broken." It was not the 3 days that Sorupananda managed when the Pandits came to complain about Tattuvarayar's poem, but it was long enough to demonstrate that Bhagavan too could effortlessly put a whole room full of people into a thought-free state for hours and hours together. Bhagavan was invited on that 1923 Shivaratri gathering of devotees to speak about Dakshinamurti, but declined, preferring instead to give a practical demonstration. Here he is in a verse from Guru Vanchika Kovai, explaining why the mauna emanation, the radiant silence of the Guru, is way more effective than speaking as a method of revealing the self. He wrote, "The abundant greatness of Brahman is that it cannot be made to shine by all the various utterances, expositions, and lectures. Because that Brahman shines forth through the rare and precious silence of the Guru, that mauna discourse is the most powerful exposition." In another verse from the same text, he again extolled the greatness of mauna, teaching through silence, and gave his usual example of Dakshinamurti bringing his 4 disciple sages to liberation through the power of his silence. He wrote, "If one inquires what is that excellent language that possesses in abundance both truth and clarity, which is the source of all languages and which possesses divine nature, the answer is, that unique language is mauna, which was taught by Dakshinamurti, who is Jnana Swarupa, Jnana, one's own true nature." Last month, when I spoke about some of Muruganar's devotional poetry, I mentioned that Bhagavan had composed over 300 lines of Ramana Puranam. Here is a portion from Bhagavan's contribution to that poem in which he movingly emphasizes Dakshinamurti's method and example. At the beginning, he mentions that Dakshinamurti is traditionally held to be the head and founder of all guru lineages. He wrote, "Youthful Mauna Guru Dakshinamurti, you who, shining as the divine manifestation of God at the head of the lineage of gurus, reveal the supreme truth, the unique speech of Mauna, that is, the mind source, which is the mother of all language, but which, unlike the spoken word, neither appears nor disappears." And Bhagavan continued there, "All the ancient treatises on jnana are merely an introductory preface enunciated by the learned to your book of Mauna, which confers true knowledge. Are they not therefore alien to true understanding, those who, even though they have studied all the others, have lost their connection to that book of Mauna?" Somewhat paradoxically, Bhagavan sometimes referred to Mauna silence as supreme speech or even transcendental speech, paravak. In Guru Vachkakovai, he said that this Mauna alone is the excellent paravak, the transcendental speech. He also sometimes said that the emanation of Mauna, silence, from the Guru to the disciple was, quote, the unique word, unquote. When he speaks about this unique word in Guru Vachkakovai and elsewhere, he is sometimes referring to the phrase Sumairu, which was his often used command, be still, but more frequently he was referring to the transcendental speech of Paravak, which he equated with Mauna. Here is Bhagavan speaking about Mauna as the supreme word or the ultimate speech. Mauna is merely the state of grace that rises from the heart as the unique word. Referring to Mauna, Sri Bhagavan said, silence is of four kinds: silence of speech, silence of the eye, silence of the ear, and silence of the mind. Only the last is pure silence and is the most important. The commentary of silence is the best commentary, as illustrated in Lord Dakshinamurti. Only the silence is the eternal speech, the one word, the heart-to-heart talk. Silence is like the even flow of electric current. Speech is like obstructing the current for lighting and other purposes. The devotee at the top next to the cover of Guru Vachkakovai is G.V. Subramaya, the author of Sri Ramana Reminiscences, the book the long quote on this slide has been taken from. The idea that Mauna is the primal flow of the self into the hearts of devotees, whereas spoken teachings were a lesser form of transmission, is one that Bhagavan mentioned on several occasions. He sometimes used a similar analogy to the one on the previous slide by saying that the flow of Mauna was comparable to the uninterrupted electrical energy in a wire, whereas speech was like the movement of an electric fan that it activates. The analogy is that the primal energy of the self is put to work when the jnani speaks, but when he does, it is a less powerful transmission than when the Mauna is flowing silently, without speech and without interruption. This works both ways. The power of the self is less strong, less direct when the jnani is compelled to speak, but the devotee can also impede the reception of the full force of Mauna by speaking and thinking when the Guru is silently transmitting the power of the self. Here is Muruganar writing about this. He wrote, when our Lord speechlessly conveys his instructions, they flow like a motionless spring into the hearts of devotees. When those who resort to his presence open their mouths and utter a few words, their speech is tantamount to blocking the spring with a stone. So the flow of Mauna is lessened when the Guru speaks, and it is also diminished when a devotee decides to speak instead of allowing the Mauna to silently do its work. Here is a dialogue in which Bhagavan explains how to have the most beneficial attitude in his presence. The question was asked by Swami Madhavatirtha, a Vedantic Pandit who visited Bhagavan in 1944. Question: while sitting near you, what sort of mental state should we have so as to receive the transmission from yourself? Bhagavan: keep your mind still, that is enough. You will get spiritual help sitting in this hall if you keep your mind still. The aim of all practices is to give up all practices. When the mind becomes still, the power of the self will be experienced. The waves of the self are pervading everywhere. If the mind is in peace, one begins to experience them. The pandits who sat in front of Sorupananda had their minds silenced for 3 days. The effect was temporary and it wore off. The same thing happened when Bhagavan stilled the minds of the 7 devotees at the 1923 Sivaratri event. A temporary quiescence followed by business as usual for the minds of those present. However, just as Sorupananda brought Tattuvarayar to a state of permanent realization through the power of his presence and silence, we can point to devotees such as Muruganar to demonstrate that Bhagavan's mauna emanations could also bring about a permanent realization. Here are some verses from Muruganar seen in the top left photo, in which he explains how the power of Bhagavan's silence, mauna, and gaze brought about his liberation. This is what he wrote. The jnana bestowing Guru brought me under his rule to the light of mauna that radiated from his face. May devotees live joyfully, regarding the Guru's divine name itself as the refreshing ambrosial food they have encountered on account of their past merit. Through the gracious gaze of the Lord, whose nature is mauna, the jnana of the self, free of objective knowledge, I began a life lived in the absolute, the reality of transcendental consciousness, such that the illusory bondage of the bodily sheaths fell away and was no more. Such was the happy destiny in which all my previously begun and as yet unfinished austerities came to fruition. All the slides in this sequence will have a photo of Muruganar in the top left. Freeing myself from the confusion of desire's delusion, the path that leads to the womb, I travelled the path whose mark is the mauna taught me by the Sadguru's gaze. Perceiving and attaining the peaceful state that is free of all affliction, I merged with the delightful state of grace, the inner understanding that is beyond compare. When he became my trusted Jnana Guru, the light of his feet of grace settled as the expanse of mauna in my heart. Now the entire manifest world, comprising differences that shine in the reflected light of the self, appears merely as shadowy specks. My Lord is the doctor of true jnana, the one who liberally bestows the grace that is mauna. Through him, my madness, the flurry and excitement of the mind was cured. As a result, I secured an attachment-free life in Swarupa, consciousness the supreme, that which shines as the medicine of truth for the madness. Ensuring that I did not wander and suffer by visiting holy places one after another, my Lord revealed to me the nature of the expanse of mauna, the immense and lofty holy place of pure grace. Having attained deathless life there, I now live in that glorious place, a place which is the roseate feet of the true God's nature that darkness cannot approach. And the final Muruganar slide. Setting me on the straight path of jnana, he led me to the glorious goal of union with him in the one-pointed state of mauna. The unreal imaginary world of objective awareness was revealed as false by my eyes' grace-bestowing jewel, the sun of jnana that dispersed the dense darkness of ignorance. He is the ultimate first cause, the supreme, dwelling in mauna. When that Lord of jnana united with me in the heart as my very own form, as the realization of the knowledge of the self that shines free of the eye sense, the deluded and conditioned bodily awareness that speaks of I and mine fell away completely. I want to move on now to the final episode of the traditional story of Sorupananda and Tattuvaraya. It comes from the same source as the earlier narrative, and it describes the final days of Sorupananda. Sorupananda started to wander aimlessly, leaving Tattuvaraya behind. Tattuvaraya followed him. When Sorupananda reached the seashore, the waters separated to let him enter. However, when Tattuvaraya tried to do the same and follow him, the sea did not part. Tattuvaraya stood on the shore, crying loudly like a calf separated from its mother. He searched for his guru in all directions. Finally, Sorupananda appeared to give him a final darshan, before shining as Akhanda Paripurna Satchitananda, the undivided transcendental fullness, being consciousness bliss. In the context of what follows, this is the author's way of saying that Sorupananda took Mahasamadhi. The account concludes, after performing his guru's samadhi rites, Tattuvaraya was constantly thinking of Sorupananda, either through the supreme love he felt for him, or through his inability to bear the separation, or because of the understanding that there was nothing for him to do apart from his guru. He immediately attained Mahasamadhi. In the photo on the right, you can see Sundaram, the former president of Sri Ramana, holding his palms over the Arati flame at the Samadhi shrine of Tattuvaraya. Sorupananda doesn't have a shrine since his body disappeared into the sea. The shrine is in the village of Gunpowder, which is located between the towns of Vridachalam and Chidambaram. Those two towns are located near the coast on the right-hand side of this map. Before I close the account of Tattuvaraya, here is a final verse from him in which he expresses his gratitude to Sorupananda for the state he bestowed on him. What if the world praises me henceforth or reviles me? What if Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, remains close to me or separate from me? What if the body assuredly exists without ever decaying or perishes? Will there be any gain or loss to me on account of them, I who have worn perfectly on my head the twin feet of immaculate Sorupananda? I'm going to conclude my talk by reading out some verses from Sorupasaram, the text by Sorupananda that was recommended by Bhagavan and put on Ramana Swami's reading list. When you hear his teachings, you will probably understand why Bhagavan appreciated and recommended them. The format is questions and answers, but it doesn't appear to be a continuous dialogue. The answers to all the questions are given by Sorupananda. Question: which entity had this experience of the self, and when did the experience arise? Answer: it is experienced by myself, and the experience is ever present. I saw my real nature as pure consciousness. I see only myself and not the great multitude of the world. Simply because I had not looked at myself thoroughly, did I at any time cease to exist. Question: what is the inherent nature of the self that shines as everything? Answer: it is shining by itself as itself. The self that shines as the body, as the beloved soul, as all the actions, as ignorance, as the enjoyment of true jnana, as the blissful reality, and as the one consciousness, that indeed is my own real nature. Question: if it is transcendent, there is no scope for inquiry. It is therefore necessary to indicate and signify it in some way. Answer: as it is everything that exists, and none of them, it is beyond description. Is it I? Is it that? Am I that? Is that I? Is it shining jnana? Is it that which lies beyond nada tattva, the highest tattva? Is it mauna? Is it the pure state, Suddha? Is it a void? The self-shining natural state is all these and none of them. Question: if it is said like this, none can realize the self, and so there can be no realization. Hence, a name should be given. Answer: the following are the names given by the Vedas. Enlightenment is I, liberation is I, perfect bliss is I, being is I, consciousness is I, tranquility is I, purity is I, that emptiness which is beyond the scope of the Vedas is I, pure consciousness, the source of all, is I. Question: are all these descriptions experienced? Answer: they are experienced and also transcended. My son, I became and dwelt as the indescribable experience, transcendental joy, and everything else. I felt no need even to declare, I have rid myself of the misery-causing karma. I have recovered myself and have been freed. Question: what is the benefit arising from this experience? Answer: it is becoming the ruler of the kingdom of liberation. I obtained the supreme lordship that is never lost. I burned up the pair of opposites, happiness and sorrow. I gave up the life of dwelling in the forest of embodied existence, which tormented me with thoughts. I entered and occupied the house of liberation. Question: where was this experience when you were regarding happiness and sorrow as I? Answer: then too I was remaining as the self. I was nothing else. Who was the one who remained as the ego, I? If I see him, I will not allow him to take up the form of the body. Only the I whose form is consciousness is the real I. All other I's will get bound to a form and go through birth and death. Question: but what is the way by which knowledge was attained and ignorance destroyed? Answer: in one's own experience of the self, neither attainment of knowledge nor removal of ignorance is seen. By what did ignorance get destroyed? Through what did knowledge gained through inquiry arise? How was the clarity known as the transcendent experience of true knowledge obtained? Other than myself, what do I know? Question: how then can there be a jnani if there was no awareness of the dawn of knowledge and the removal of ignorance? A clue should be given. Answer: with ignorance removed from knowledge, like unreal from real, becoming both and becoming neither, this indeed is the nature of the jnani. When ultimately the real shone as I, did the unreal, which became I, go anywhere? I myself became the base of both the real and the unreal, but remained beyond the reach of the conflicting pair of real and unreal. Question: is there birth and death during the period of ignorance that exists prior to this experience? Answer: as these are illusory, they do not exist. Oh, where was I born? What did I worship as God? Where did I seek refuge? When I became the blissful essence, the reality, experiencing unbroken bliss, were not all these known to be false? Question: in what condition was the self before the dawning of this experience? Answer: having been redeemed by realization of the truth, I am no longer aware of this. I lived becoming someone. I labored in vain for somebody. I underwent change, taking 1,000 names. Now enough of this. I have seen myself, that which was hard for me to discover. Oh, now I am free. And that concludes my presentation on Sorupananda, Tattuvaraya, Bhagavan, and the power of the Guru, especially his silence. Thank you for attending and listening to what I had to say. Apologies for the length. I got caught up in a few digressions along the way. Last month, after I gave the talk on Muruganar, I decided to make a supplementary video in which I just read out verses from the Muruganar works I've been talking about. I may well do the same this month. There are a large number of verses by Muruganar on mauna, which I will assemble and read out, along with other quotes by Bhagavan that elaborate on the same theme. Thank you for joining me.